Here's an interesting hypothetical with a counterintuitive result. So, suppose there are 100 passengers waiting to board an airplane. The first person in line is a bit scatterbrained and has misplaced their boarding pass. No problem, they think. I'll just pick a random seat. Yeah, they're one of those people. So after the first person, the rest of the 99 passengers will do one of two things. If their seat is available, they will sit in it. Okay, simple enough. If their seat is already occupied, they will pick a random available seat. Why? Who knows? That's just the kind of thing hypothetical passengers do. So the question is, what are the odds that the last passenger to board will get their assigned seat? Now, before you say, I'm not good at math and give up on the problem, I'm going to solve this without any complicated math, so just stick with me. Now, when I first heard this problem, my instinct was that the last person probably wasn't going to get their seat. I mean, whatever the odds are, they must be low, was basically my response. After all, we had 99 people before them, many of whom are probably picking random seats. Surely someone would have ended up in their seat. That feels right, but statistics is one area where it seems like your gut instinct is often wrong. So to get to the real answer, we could do a whole bunch of complicated math, or we could just think about what's actually happening when each person boards the plane. Now, like most statistics problems, I think it's a bit easier to consider a smaller version of the problem first. So imagine we have just 2 seats on the plane. The first passenger, let's call her Alice, boards and picks one of the 2 seats. Alice either takes her own seat, or she chooses the last passenger, let's call him Bob's seat. It's pretty clear that in this scenario, the odds of Bob getting his assigned seat are 50%. Okay, so how about 3 seats? Well, there's 6 possibilities this time. Alice takes one of the 3 seats, and then Bob and Carol are in the other 2, one way or the other. And this is where we start to get a glimpse of what's really going on here. So if all 3 passengers were choosing random seats, the odds of Carol getting her seat would be 1 in 3. But they're not choosing random seats. Alice chooses a random seat, but all subsequent passengers follow the rules. They only choose a random seat if their seat is occupied. So of the 3 options for Alice, in 2 of them, Bob would be taking his assigned seat, which means our chart of possible seating arrangements has to be adjusted to fit with our hypothetical boarding rules. For example, in the 5th row, since Alice is in seat C, Bob's seat is open when he boards, and he will sit there, leaving Alice's seat for Carol. Row 2 also changes for the same reason, and we find that Carol has actually a 50% chance of sitting in her seat. 50%. Interesting. Okay, I want to do one more before we jump back up to the 100-passenger version. So Dave is going to join the group now, and here are all of the possibilities. Again, starting as if the passengers boarded randomly. Now this gives Dave a 25% chance of sitting in his assigned seat. But like before, we have to consider that Bob, Carol, and Dave follow the rules. So anytime Alice isn't in Bob's seat, Bob chooses Bob's seat. At any time neither Alice nor Bob are in Carol's seat, Carol will choose hers. And so once again, the seating arrangement chart needs to be adjusted to fit with our boarding rules in this hypothetical. This time, looking at row 4, Alice chose her seat. So Bob and Carol will follow suit since their seats are unoccupied, leaving Dave's seat open for him when he boards. Quite a few other rows adjust accordingly, and we end up with 12 of the 24 arrangements where Dave is in his assigned seat. Again, 50%. Now, you may look at that list and say, well, you're counting the same scenario multiple times. For example, we have 6 different times that all 4 passengers sit in their assigned seats. But you have to think about it in terms of how often these events will happen. So really the chart should look more like this, with the relative widths of the blocks being their probabilities, because 25% of the time, Alice will sit in her seat and everyone else will just follow suit. Okay, we're going to jump to the 100 passengers next, but before we do that, let's look back quickly at our 3 and 4 passenger scenarios again, and consider this question. Where does the last passenger sit? Well, Carol was always in seat A or C, and Dave was always in seat A or D. And that's the key thing to notice here. The last passenger always sat in one of 2 seats, their assigned seat or Alice's seat. And this actually makes sense if you try to imagine a scenario where the last passenger sits in someone else's seat. For Dave to sit in Bob's seat, for example, Bob's seat must have been empty when Dave boarded the plane. But that means that it would have been empty when Bob boarded the plane, so he would have sat in it. Okay, so now we can jump all the way to our 100-passenger plane. When the last passenger boards, let's call him Zach, the only option that can be open is Zach's seat or Alice's seat, because anyone else would have already sat in their seat if it were empty when they boarded. And if Zach has two options, both of which are equally likely to be open, then there is a 50% chance that Zach will sit in his assigned seat. Okay, now be honest. How many of you intuitively thought the odds were that high? Some of you may still not believe the odds are that high, but they are indeed. And I think this result is even more surprising when you consider that the answer is 50% for a plane of any size. You could have 2 seats, 100 seats, or 1 trillion seats, and that last passenger will always have a 50% chance of getting their assigned seat, as long as the passengers are following this weird boarding plan. But anyways, okay, before we go, I'll leave it to you to consider a similar scenario. Alice chooses a random seat, and each subsequent passenger sits in their assigned seat if it's available, as before. However, this time, if their seat is taken, they kick the person out of the seat and take their assigned seat back. The ousted passenger then chooses a random seat from those still available. What are Zach's odds this time? Are they better? Are they worse? Or is it still 50-50? Does it depend on the size of the plane now? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and once you're done with that, you can go check out this other video that YouTube thinks you'll like.